Shabbat Shalom and Happy New Year. So it is the season of Nostradamus. Maybe you frequent different parts of the internet than I do, but every time the new year comes around, you get a dozen different posts about all of the prophecies that were fulfilled during this last year, and all of the prophecies that are going to be fulfilled in the year that's about to start. Am I the only one? I guess I poke around in the dark holes a bit more often than some. And of course, it's all nonsense, right? Nostradamus was a charlatan in his lifetime, and it's amazing how long he's been able to be a grifter off something that he never anticipated would be still read, studied, and let alone believed hundreds of years after his death. Yet people do. Now, one of the interesting interpretations of his work that I came across recently was the reason why his prophecies seem so compelling is not just because they are beautifully vague, allowing you to apply them to anything you feel like, but the idea is that many of his prophecies are direct poetic reinterpretations of historical events from antiquity. And that what Nostradamus had done was simply open up history books from his day, read through different events, and say, oh, that sounds good. We'll just make him a sheep, and we'll make that person a plague, and basically recast history into his little poetic quatrains. And that way, they sound legit, because we all know history repeats itself. That by using an actual template of history, he is able to put it into a plausible sound, because after all, it did happen once in that way, and even if, it's never going to happen again that way, it at least has a ring of believability. And people want to believe. You've all heard that phrase, right? History repeats itself. What nonsense. What nonsense. Look at what we just read during the Torah portion today. Right? What we read today was the history of all of the tribes. Well, poor Benjamin has to wait till next year to be part of our public reading, but hopefully you read him in your own personal reading. All of the tribes, based off the history that they had faced, would give a reflection of what would come. Right? Poor Reuben. Reuben, you have been a mess up, says Jacob. Right? You have constantly messed up. And you know what? You're going to keep messing up. History repeats itself. Levi and Shimon, you guys are violent, violent people. You think that every problem has a solution at the edge of a sword. And you're going to keep being violent and nasty, and you're going to have trouble. And Judah, Judah, you have been majestic and regal and wonderful. You will stay majestic and regal and wonderful. Yay, yeah, if you're part of Judah, that's, yeah, okay. But is it really? Because if we read it in the line of Nostradamus, if we read these as being true prophecies that are locked into a future vision, then what does that do for Reuben and Shimon and Levi, or even Judah or the others? They now become merely recurring figures, playing out the same story again and again and again, stepping onto the stage, saying the lines that they are forced to say, dealing with the consequences, and then exiting, waiting only for their chance to come out and do it again and again. This was the common belief of the pagan world, right? You've probably all seen Disney's wonderful movie, The Lion King, right? What's the opening song that everyone loves? The circle of life. Thank you, Ilana. Right? The circle of life. Right? Where you have all of the gazelle and antelope and zebra coming out and bowing down to the lion that's going to eat them. Saying this is the circle of life. Because you know what? It's the way things have been. It's the way things are. It's the way things will be. The zebra gets eaten by the lion. Done. Nothing ever changes. Nothing ever will. This is the pagan view of the world. The world is static, unmovable. They might have had some mythic past where change happened, where their gods created the world and created their people and set them in their place. But once that was done, We're done. From now on, it's just again and again and again. New year, same life. New year, same life. You live, you work, you die. If you are born a slave, you will always be a slave, and so will your children. If you were born a noble, you will always be a noble, and so will your children. This was the pagan concept, whether you were a hunter-gatherer or whether you were a Roman emperor. Life was unchanging, and that was how it was supposed to be. In such a place, saying history repeats itself makes perfect sense. History would repeat itself because the institutions would ensure that history would repeat itself. And then along come the pushy Jews. And the Torah says, has anything like this ever happened before? That is a revolutionary statement. Has anything like this? This is unprecedented. That there would be a people that end up stuck in Egypt and get pulled out by God and become their own nation and have the 3,000 years of history. Has this ever happened before? Have anyone ever noticed that it happened before? This is what Judaism is saying, is that the world is not immutable. The world is not locked. There is no stinking circle of life where the zebras have to enjoy being eaten by the lions because that's the way it's supposed to be. The zebras can fight back, and they can stop the lions. And God does not want the zebras to be good, docile zebras being chewed up by the lions because that's the way things are. God wants there to be freedom. God wants there to be liberty. God wants there to be peace. God wants people to be able to live in dignity. And God proved that by taking us out of Egypt and by keeping us alive for 3,000 years in defiance of the cycle of history repeating itself. Because there is nothing precedented or repetitive in Jewish history. Every single event is unique and new and is moving us forward, not in a circle. We are not merely rehashing the same thing again and again. This is why it's one of my pet peeves when people say the Jewish holidays are, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. It's not true. Every single drama is different. Every single event is different. And every event moves us in a direction, not back to where we were to rehash it again. Judaism tells us, against the pagan belief of the eternity and unchanging of the world, that the world is changing day by day, and it is up to us to grab a hold of the wheel and steer that change. We have been given this task. And even if you don't believe in the divinity of the revelation, even if you don't believe that the Torah explains this, even if you don't believe Jewish history shows this, simply ask yourself, how did the Romans get to be the Romans? Because at one time, the Romans were suckling from the teat of a wolf as Romulus and Remus, and the 7 hills that were barren. And eventually they became an empire. They did not do that by simply redoing everything that had happened before, or else they would still be there among the wolves. Instead, they seized an opportunity and grew and changed and developed. And once they were happy with their position, then they said, we're done. Now there was no more change. And of course, Judaism came along, and the Romans said, oh, by the way, you're part of our empire now. And we said, no, we're not. They said, yes, you are. And we fought a few wars about that. And indeed, because ultimately Rome refused to accept and adapt and change, they were destroyed. We weren't. We went through rough times, but we were not destroyed because we recognized that Rome was but one step, one blip in the arc of history, and that we would endure, and we would change, and we would come out the other side different than we were, but we would move one step closer to a world that was redeemed. This is the promise that Judaism has given to the world. The idea that others in the world now accept almost for granted that the world can be changed, even if they're not always 100% sure about that. But the fact that it's even a possibility is the greatest gift Judaism has given to the rest of the world. It is why, as Jews have become more and more accepted within the world has accelerated its pace of change, because we have taught them this lesson, That they don't have to simply accept that people will die of preventable illness. That they don't have to accept that people will starve because they do not have enough food. That they don't have to accept that people will be subjugated, exploited, enslaved, or otherwise mistreated. That in fact, all of that can change. And all of that will change. And all of it is changing. The only difference, the only decision you have to make is, will you be behind that side of change that is moving us towards a redeemed world? Or will you allow yourself to simply be dead weight, part of the bloated inertia that stands in the way of moving us towards redemption? Those are the only two options that are available. And Judaism quite clearly tells us which side we should be on. Shabbat Shalom.